like to reach out to energy companies from our end, you know, we just don't know.
I guess they would be interested in this, but I don't know. They have a list of everyone who's here.
I mean, there's
I suggest
Ladies and gentlemen, we have a very full day, and I'm going to get us started. I'm going to go outside and get a cup of coffee, and I would encourage anyone who would like to go get a coffee refill to do so now, because I intend to get us started in about 90 seconds.
that's why I'm here.
It's a very interesting economy for one thing. And, I'm an econometrician, and the nice thing about it is
Oh, okay.
largely, I just found that I'm mostly Middle East is my real orientation. Middle East is my real orientation. So.
yeah, we actually
Oh, thank you. I forgot mine, of course. But yeah, I'd like to keep in touch with you. I'm away from Pakistan in terms of the literature. I find that the best way to catch up is to go back.
Targeted energy companies.
You never know if they want to cross sectors.
Well, I this one's open.
Ladies and gentlemen, if I may have your attention now. If I might encourage everyone to take a seat. We have a very full day, and if we get started too much later, we might just keep going until 7 or 8 tonight, and I think even the most dedicated of you might not be prepared for that, so I do want to get us started. I'm Bob Hathaway. I direct the Asia program here at the Woodrow Wilson Center. I'm also head of the Pakistan program. Since many of you are new to the Wilson Center, I'd like to tell you just a bit about who we are and what we do. We are one of Washington's leading nonpartisan independent institutes for advanced research. We bring approximately 150 visiting scholars a year from around the world to the center to research and to write. We host something in the order of 700 public meetings a year, such as the one that you see today. We were created by the U.S. Congress almost 40 years ago in 1968 as the nation's official memorial to President Wilson. President Wilson, some of you may know, was not only one of America's most distinguished presidents, but before that he was president of Princeton University, and before that a very prominent academic political scientist. The Wilson Center tries to commemorate both of President Wilson's passions, public policy and rigorous scholarship. We see ourselves as providing something of a bridge between the world of the scholar and the world of the official. We publish one of the country's leading quarterlies, the Wilson Quarterly. If any of you do not get that now and would like a free subscription, if you will see me afterwards, I will see if I can't use my vast influence to get you a subscription. We have our own television program, our own radio program, so we're a very busy place. About three and a half years ago, some friends came and met with me, and more importantly, met with my boss, Lee Hamilton, who is the president and director of the Wilson Center, and proposed the establishment of a separate Pakistan program, which, after reflection, we eagerly decided to move forward in this direction. And that's what brings us all here today. The purpose of our Pakistan program is to promote nonpartisan, non-ideological scholarship about Pakistan, to encourage informed dialogue on issues of public interest in Pakistan and to those who follow U.S.-Pakistan relations. Furthermore, we seek to foster a greater understanding in each of the two countries about the other, in the hopes that over time, out of this understanding will grow a closer, more sustained partnership between our two countries. Now you say, boy, that's a pretty ambitious agenda. How do you manage to do all that? And we do it in a number of ways. We bring, first of all, a scholar from Pakistan to the Wilson Center for a 9-month stay every year. This scholar is chosen on the basis of an intensely competitive process. Many of you, I think, may have known our most recent scholar, who was here from September of last year through the end of May this year, Mushtaq Khan. Mushtaq is when he's not at the Wilson Center, is a senior official at Citigroup, based in Karachi, and was doing some excellent work on Pakistan's financial situation. We have recently announced the appointment of next year's scholar, next year being an academic year. So the next year's scholar, in fact, will be here this September. And that scholar is Ahmed of the Friday Times and the Daily Times. I expect some of you know him. There is a press release on the table outside, immediately outside that door, announcing his appointment, and we are delighted that he will be joining us in the fall. He'll be working on a project on sectarian conflict in Pakistan, an issue which is certainly poorly understood in this country, and we're delighted to have him here. We also, in addition to our annual competition for our, quote, Pakistan Scholar, we also host other scholars here at the Wilson Center who are working on Pakistan and Pakistan issues. I see Bill Milam over there, former ambassador, American ambassador to Pakistan. Bill is a senior policy scholar here and gives me terrific amount of help on Pakistan and is working on a book on Pakistan. Javed Burki down at the end of this table was a public policy scholar here several years ago working on a book on Musharraf. And so we try to bring other senior people to the center to give them an opportunity to research and to write. In addition, the Pakistani program holds regular conferences and meetings and seminars and workshops such as this one. We publish. I hope that many of you on your way in stopped at that table outside, and if you didn't on your way in, do so on the way out. We have our two most recent Pakistan publications out there, both of them growing out of conferences such as this one. Following this conference, we'll also be producing a volume on the topic of this conference. Lastly, the Pakistan program here provides a forum for Pakistan officials who seek a Washington audience. We hosted President Musharraf when he came to Washington in 2002. We have had two different governors of the State Bank of Pakistan speak here for a total of 3 times in the last 2+ years. We have hosted other ministers as well as many parliamentarians and other dignitaries. Now, in that context, I would like to make an important point. The Wilson Center and its Pakistan program is apolitical, not only in an American context, but also in a Pakistani context. We do not have a Pakistani political agenda. We don't support a particular party. We would like to provide a forum to anyone from any party or no party who has a role to play, a contribution to make in Pakistani affairs. Our conference today offers a good example of what we're trying to do with our new Pakistan program. Pakistan's economy is growing. With this growth comes higher energy consumption and stronger pressures on the country's energy resources. At present, as many of you know, natural gas and oil supply the bulk of Pakistan's current energy needs. However, the consumption of these energy sources vastly exceeds the domestic supply. For instance, Pakistan currently produces only 18% of the oil it consumes. And the imports, this dependence on oil imports places a considerable strain on the country's balance of payments position. On the other hand, hydropower and coal are perhaps underutilized today, as Pakistan has ample, at least potential, supplies of both. Pakistan's proven coal reserves are the world's 6th largest, a fact which I didn't know until began preparing for this conference. And the Pakistani government has said that it intends to increase the share of coal in the overall energy mix from its current 7% to 18% within a dozen years. This might make good sense in an energy context. It obviously also has troubling environmental implications. And as you'll see later in the morning, we believe that you cannot talk about Pakistan's energy needs without also bringing in questions of environmental sustainability. Nuclear power at this point accounts for only 1% of Pakistan's energy consumption. The government has said that Pakistan needs to generate 8,800 megawatts of nuclear energy by the year 2020, as compared to the current output of less than 450 megawatts. Islamabad has urged the United States and other Western countries to help it develop its civilian nuclear technology to meet its growing energy needs, but as you know, this is a controversial idea. The need to address Pakistan's present and prospective energy requirements was a topic of discussion during President Bush's recent visit to Islamabad last March. The joint statement issued by the two presidents at the conclusion of the Bush visit spoke of creating a bilateral energy working group and of working together to develop public and private collaboration on a broad range of energy sources. We're not part of that official initiative, but I think that our effort today parallels what Musharraf and Bush spoke about doing last March. So the purpose of this conference then today is to consider Pakistan's energy needs over the next 20 to 30 years, and to try to promote a more informed discussion about how Pakistan might succeed in meeting its energy requirements in the years ahead. This conference has one basic working assumption, and I want to spell it out to you so you know where we're coming from. The conference is based upon the following proposition. If Pakistan is to succeed in its ambitious plans for economic development, if Pakistan is to raise the grossly inadequate living standards of its people, if it is to achieve the economic growth necessary to ensure political stability, if it is to create democratic institutions and practices capable of providing good government and reflecting the will of the people, if it is to establish the conditions for long-term financial solvency, if it is to begin to address the many environmental problems that up to now have been largely ignored and which have a hugely adverse impact upon the daily lives of Pakistani citizens. If Pakistan is to live in peace with its neighbors, several of whom are directly impacted by Pakistani decision-making in the energy sector. If Pakistan is to move forward on all these goals, it must successfully address the many challenges it faces in the field of energy. This is our agenda for today. How can Pakistan act today so as to be ready to meet its energy needs tomorrow? Before we turn to our first speaker, a couple of administrative announcements. I would ask everyone to reach into your pocket, reach into your purse, and cut off your mobile phone. We have coffee and other refreshments right outside the door. You're welcome to go in and out and replenish your cup. The restrooms are right down this corridor at the end of this hall behind me. We'll be serving lunch at 12:30, and there'll be further announcement about that later in the day. Lastly, I need to acknowledge some debts. Putting a conference on like this produces many debts. First, and perhaps most obviously, to the speakers at today's events, some of whom have come from literally halfway around the world, others of whom have come from as far away as Canada, California, in order to share their experience and their expertise with us. Without them, of course, we couldn't have done this. A second type of debt to those in Pakistan and the United States, some of whom are here today, who have demonstrated their confidence in the Wilson Center and its Pakistan program by the very tangible means of supporting us financially. Again, without these people, we could not have held this event. In this context, I want to single out, though I've been fortunate enough to have a number of contributors, I want to single out the Fellowship Fund for Pakistan, which is a charitable trust based in Karachi, whose support has been absolutely indispensable, not only for today's conference, but for all our Pakistan-related activities. And at the risk of embarrassing him, I want to acknowledge Zafar Khan. Zafar, if you'll raise your hand or stand up. Zafar chairs the Advisory Council of the Fellowship Fund for Pakistan. I have leaned heavily on him in the preparation of this conference. I have relied on his judgment from the very beginning of our Pakistan program. He has come from Pakistan expressly for this conference. And Zafar, I just want to publicly say thank you to you and your colleagues. Another debt to my hard-working and long-suffering staff. Many, though I'm not sure all of who are here right now, and I want them to raise their hands. First, Michael Kugelman. Michael, raise your hand. Mark Moore. Mark. Bamika Machala. Is Bamika in here at this point? Bamika, I think, is outside. Bamika did an awful lot of work and recruited, in fact, a number of our speakers. And if you get a chance, thank her. And then we have a young Pakistani American who's interning for us, and all of you saw her because she's at the table giving out lapel badges. Aisha Yuki. She too has played a key role. As anyone who's ever been in a managerial position knows, it's the staff that does the heavy lifting in an event like this, and I couldn't have done it without them. Lastly, thanks to all of you. You've come today to listen, I hope to learn, but I also hope you've come today to share your expertise, because many of you have a great deal of experience in the energy field as well, and we look forward to hearing from you. We have a full day. I want to now move into our first panel by introducing our keynote speaker. Mukhtar Ahmed has held the position of Energy Advisor to the Prime Minister of Pakistan since May of last year. He has 20 years of professional expertise in the oil and gas industry in both the private and the public sectors. In addition, he worked with the Asian Development Bank for 16 years on energy sector operations in Pakistan, Indonesia, China, and the Philippines. While on loan from the Asian Development Bank, he served as Managing Director and CEO of Sui Southern Gas Company, one of Pakistan's largest natural gas utilities. He is widely regarded as one of his country's most thoughtful and knowledgeable analysts on energy issues. And by virtue of his appointment as the Prime Minister's principal energy advisor, he's now in a position to translate his extensive experience into policy decision-making. He's also accompanied by his wife, whom I've not had the pleasure of meeting, but I would like to acknowledge her. You really didn't need to sit in the very back, but we're delighted, Mrs. Ahmed, you're here as well. Mr. Ahmed, we're grateful for you coming all the way from Pakistan in order to speak to us today. We look forward to your presentation, and I now invite you to come to the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a round of applause for our keynote speaker.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to start by thanking the Wilson Center for having invited me to talk to you on a subject which is fairly close to my heart and which I think is of considerable importance to the future of Pakistan. I will not be so presumptuous as to state that I have all the answers to what is intrinsically a very complex question. How do we best manage our energy resources for the benefit of the country? What I've tried to do is to put together for you a few slides which will define the state of the energy sector in Pakistan, what the government's thinking is with regard to what we need to do with the energy sector, what the options are, what challenges we face. I am grateful that the Wilson Center has put together such a distinguished audience here. I hope that this will result in interaction, and at the end of the day, I am able to walk away from this conference with ideas on how to better perform in my current position. I will start with a fairly straightforward indication of where we are in Pakistan with regard to energy. We are a fairly large country, 152 million. Our latest per capita number is 847. In the last fiscal year, we had a fairly impressive GDP growth rate of about 8.4%. Industry is a fairly strong performer in Pakistan. We have a long way to go with regard to literacy. We have a literacy level of something like 50%. Population below poverty line, we're still looking at about a quarter of our people below that. Households with electricity, 60%. Households with natural gas, 18%. I thought I would provide this backdrop to you. It will probably assist in understanding the issues related to the energy sector as we move down the road. What are we trying to do? What are our policy objectives with regard to the energy sector? Clearly, we need, our primary objective is to try and make arrangements whereby adequate supply is made available for the energy sector. We are looking at fairly strong economic growth rates. As I said, last year we achieved something like 8.5%. This year, the official statistics are not yet out, but we're looking at something in the region of about 6.5, 6.6, something in that region. We want to ensure security of energy supply in addition to adequacy by diversifying our energy mix. As a subsequent slide will illustrate, we're overly dependent on a few forms of energy. We want to broaden that base. We need to do a lot of work with regard to maximizing the utilization of our indigenous resources. This is again something that we will look at in some detail as we go down the road. Now, these are fundamental issues: adequate energy and security of supply. These are two fundamental requirements. We also need to do things which will ensure that the sector is viable in the long term. We need to therefore understand who should be doing what in the energy sector. I will confess that in Pakistan's history we have not been able to get our act together effectively in this regard. We now have a fairly clear direction, in as much as we understand that the role of the government for the energy sector should be restricted to policy formulation. Regulation of the sector should be undertaken by a regulatory body through an arm's length arrangement. And the running of the sector should, as far as possible, be left to the private sector through independent boards of directors. The other issue which is important for the long-term viability of the sector is what structure we have for the energy sector. We have had this question that has been asked over many years as to what the government's strategic role should be. Should the government have any presence in the sector, or should it walk away and assign that responsibility entirely to the private sector? What is an appropriate public-private partnership arrangement for the energy sector? A further fundamental point is the matter regarding pricing. In order to ensure that the sector remains viable in the long term, we need to put in place arrangements which will allow pricing to be set on a cost of service basis, and subsidies, if necessary, be targeted and be transparent. In a country with wide disparities in terms of income, in terms of social status, subsidies are not something that we can walk away with. There are segments of our society that do need to be subsidized. But how do we go about doing this? What is a transparent mechanism for subsidizing these underprivileged segments of our society? Now, in order to meet these objectives, what we are trying to do is to implement an energy development plan on an integrated basis. Again, I will confess that we have not been entirely successful in doing that in the past. We have tended to look at various parts of the energy sector in small compartments, silos. People have been looking at gas, people have been looking at coal, others have been looking at power. The requirement is to look at energy as on an integrated basis, and we need to develop an integrated energy plan. And we are in the process of doing this. We need to do a lot more towards the acceleration of the development of our indigenous energy resources. To give you an example, our coal potential is substantial, as Bob Hathaway stated in his opening remarks. We have, however, been singularly unsuccessful in exploiting these reserves. Again, we have a fairly substantial hydroelectric power potential. Again, we have a very low level of utilization of hydropower in Pakistan. We need to do something about renewable energy or alternative energy, and this is of particular significance in the context of our attempts to develop remote and rural areas. Renewable energy has a significant role to play in the development of off-grid areas, where it makes economic sense, perhaps not financial sense, to provide energy through renewable sources. We also need to do something to exploit the potential for cross-border energy transactions. If you look at the map of the region, you will see that Pakistan is fairly well located in terms of where the resources are located and where the demand centers are. And it therefore offers a sort of a natural transit area for energy movement. And Pakistan itself needs fairly significant imported energy inputs. The challenge is large. If you look at the investment required, we're looking at huge sums of money. And clearly this cannot be met from the government's resources. The government does not have the financial resources, the technical resources, the management resources to provide, to meet the needs of the energy sector on its own. It therefore needs to bring into play in a substantial manner the private sector. We therefore need to create an environment for the participation of the private sector in energy. Now, Okay, I hope this works. Okay. It worked just before I started. Michael, can you help? I don't think I'm doing anything wrong. Okay. Sorry. Okay. Thank you.
Because he's under 30 years old.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Let me just do that. Okay. I'm all independent now. Okay. Now, this is a map which illustrates the location of our oil and gas reserves and our coal reserves. You will see that the bulk of our gas is in this area, Balochistan and Sindh. We have fairly substantial coal reserves here. We have a pretty substantial infrastructure for gas in Pakistan. There are transmission lines which run north-south. This is about 10,000 kilometers of pipeline. And for distribution of gas, we're looking at something like 60,000 kilometers of pipeline. The gas industry in Pakistan is fairly mature. It's, I think, the first field was discovered in 1952, so 54 years ago was when gas came into play in Pakistan's economy. So it is a fairly significant player. Our oil reserves are fairly small, as a later slide will demonstrate. The coal reserves that I was talking to you about earlier, they're located primarily in Sindh, in a place called Thar. I believe it has a potential of something like 175 billion tons. But there are also smaller reserves located in Punjab and Balochistan. Okay. Okay. No. Now, now this is essentially a slide which demonstrates or illustrates our power grid. As you can see, again, we have a north-south system here. The northern part of Pakistan, all areas excluding Karachi, are managed by an outfit called the Water and Power Development Authority of Pakistan, WAPDA, that's the acronym. And the southern part is handled by a separate entity which has recently been privatized, the Karachi Electric Supply Corporation. So that is the power system in Pakistan. Okay. Now, let me present some facts to you. We have our energy consumption last year was 56 million tons of oil equivalent. Huge dependence on oil and gas, 80%. Nuclear, less than 1%. Hydroelectric, 11 or 12% in that region. Coal, about 8%. Now, some comments on these numbers. We are extremely uncomfortable with the overwhelming dependence on oil and gas. This is not a comfortable position to be in. We need to do something with regard to coal. When Pakistan came into being about, when was it, 1947, close to 60 years ago, Pakistan dependence on coal as a primary energy source was to the extent of about 60%. Today we're down to about 8%. Hydroelectric power, only 11 or 12%. Nuclear, 1%. Renewables don't even feature in that picture, as you can see. Right. Now, out of that 56 million tons of oil equivalent, 23 are being used for power generation. And for power generation, the principal source of fuel supply is gas, 55%, oil 15%, nuclear 3%, and hydroelectric power is 27% of that mix. Okay. Now, where does this all go? This is a chart which illustrates what the major consuming sectors are. Industry is predominant at 41%, but this includes the power. Right. Transport 31, again a major player. Domestic 21, the rest are relatively small. Now, this is something that I think I wanted to share with you. Pakistan's per capita energy consumption is abysmally low. It's something like 14 million BTU. Right? If you look at that in comparison with where Malaysia is today, Malaysia is something in the region of about 90. So there is a huge disparity there. Right? We are roughly at the same level as India, but India, as you know, has a much larger population base. We are behind Indonesia, which has, again, a much larger population base. Now, this is a little misleading, but so therefore I have a footnote there. Clearly, the per capita energy consumption in any country is also a function of the structure of the country's economy. So you cannot really compare a developed country with a developing country. So that is an issue. But I thought I would just illustrate the overall picture to you. But that's where we are. Also, something which has not been stated on this slide: the efficiency of energy use in Pakistan is also very low. Right? In terms of units of energy consumed divided by GDP, we are at a fairly low level. So there is a huge potential for energy efficiency programs in Pakistan. Now, these are projections. For the purpose of this presentation, I've relied largely on official data. I haven't generated data independently. So we are at something like 56 million tons today, and it is projected that if we grow at about 6.5% per year, our energy requirement over the next 20 years will almost quadruple to something like 200 million tons of oil equivalent. These numbers have been plucked out of the medium-term development framework of the Planning Commission. Now, this is again the same story reflected in this graphical form. The middle line here illustrates where our demand would be if we were to achieve a 6.5% growth rate. Right. What I've also done is I have looked at a 5.5% growth rate scenario and a 7.4% growth rate scenario. 7.4 is the number that has been used for the medium-term development framework. But again, as I said, it is in a fairly alarming state of affairs. We're looking at quadrupling our energy requirements over a span of 20 years. Right? The consequences of not being able to do that, of not being able to meet these requirements, have been very well stated by Bob Hathaway in his opening remarks. What happens if we're not able to do this? What are the consequences on society? And that's the bigger question that we need to answer. Now, again, if we're looking at these numbers, what is happening is we're moving from a level of dependence of about 28% to 45% by 2015. These numbers are basically, we're looking at indigenous supply versus total requirement, and what gap needs to be bridged through imports, right? So today we are bridging that gap to the extent of 28%. This will rise to 45% over the next 10 years or so, and to 62% over the next 20 years. So it's, again, a frightening prospect. The same story repeated and illustrated in a graphical form. Now, what do we do with this sort of situation? When we take a look at our indigenous resources, our oil resources, our oil reserves are very, very limited. We are meant to be a gas-prone geology. In terms of million tons of oil equivalent, it's only 41, whereas current unutilized gas reserves in the country are something in the region of 629 billion tons of oil equivalent, which translates to about 29 TCF of gas. Coal proven reserves, 991, which is about 50% more than gas. But as I said earlier, if we're looking at potential coal reserves, this is a much larger number. We're looking at something like 185 billion tons of coal. But this is an apple-to-apple comparison. I'm looking at proven gas, proven oil, and proven coal here. Hydroelectric power, we're meant to have a potential of something like 42,000 megawatt, of which a pitiful 6,500 megawatt has been put on stream so far. That eye there, I think, is I like the picture, but it puts things in perspective in a sense, right? Okay. Now, if we express these on a reserves to production ratio basis, we'll have something like 13 years of oil left, 22 years of gas left, and 720 years of coal left. Right? But I must warn you that the reserves to production thing is a very misleading statistic, because it assumes that you're going to consume at the same rate as we're currently consuming, which is clearly not the case. But nevertheless, this is used often in industry, and I thought I would illustrate the what is important is the difference between oil and coal, and the difference between gas and coal. That is what I wanted to illustrate to you. Hydroelectric potential utilization, as I said, has been very low. We're looking at only about 16% of the utilization of the potential having been realized. Now, where do we go from here? We have oil and gas exploration, which is ongoing, but the reserves are expected to decline. Our oil production level is currently something in the region of about 65,000 barrels per day. It has stagnated at that level for a number of years. So we, as I said earlier, the country's geology is meant to be gas-prone rather than oil-prone. There is some activity in offshore areas. It hasn't yielded any results yet. We are trying to incentivize oil and gas exploration through improved terms for E&P companies. That process is ongoing, and we hope to maintain a competitive edge relative to countries in the region. Coal, this is not a very happy story. We have fairly large reserves, and often people have asked about the quality of our reserves. We have lignite, but it is lignite of the quality which is being used fairly widely all over the world for power generation. It is not, the quality has not been a bottleneck with regard to the utilization of coal. There have been other factors. Coal needs to be brought into the picture in a much bigger way than it has. There are, the coal reserves are located in a part of the country which is very difficult. It has, Thar is the major reserve. There are serious water availability problems. You have temperatures something in the region of about in the mid-50s. In the summer, it is an extremely inhospitable environment. There are water shortages, but it's a very, very difficult environment. But nevertheless, I think, as this presentation will demonstrate, we need to do whatever is necessary to bring these resources into play. Hydroelectric potential, again large, only 16% utilized. This is located in the northern parts of Pakistan mainly. This has unfortunately fallen victim to a number of various extraneous, what's the right word? Impediments, not necessarily sector related, and we really need to get over that hump in order to be able to utilize our hydroelectric resources. So that is the position with regard to indigenous resources. Now, it is very clear that however, whatever we do with regard to the utilization of indigenous resources, over the medium to long term, there has to be infusion of imported energy into Pakistan. That is fairly clear, whatever forecasts you look at. So what are we doing about it? We are looking at natural gas import into Pakistan, and we are looking at we have three sources. Qatar is one, Iran is the next, Turkmenistan is the third. There are issues associated with all these three sources. We are in active discussion with Iran. We are in active discussion with the Turkmens. The Qatar alternative is on the back burner in a sense, because the Qataris have told us that most of their gas is committed to their LNG expansion plans. So they do not have gas available for a 30-year commitment to a pipeline project. So these three schemes are under consideration, some more active than others. We are also looking at power import into Pakistan from Central Asia. We're looking at Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan as two possible sources of power into Pakistan. Tajikistan has is in the process of developing significant hydropower. And we are hoping to be able to tap into that and also get some from Kyrgyzstan. We're looking at something like 1,000 megawatt initially from Central Asia into Pakistan. Right. Now, changing gears. I've included a slide here which illustrates comparative cost of fuels. Okay, so we have a $1 per million BTU number for each of these, $4 for gas. Now, some of this is speculation, right? Gas today, the gas that we produce in Pakistan today, the price that we pay for that gas is something like $3 per million BTU. That's the average price that we pay for gas in Pakistan to the indigenous producer. If we were to import gas, it's probably going to cost us more. So I've put a $4 number there. But please don't hold me to these numbers. I don't want to be quoted as saying that this is what I'm expecting to buy, the price that I'm expecting Pakistan to pay to Iran or whatever. Right? This is not. These are numbers which I've picked up for the purpose of a comparative analysis of what our options are. LNG, again, as you know, LNG prices have varied from something like $3 to about $15 in the market. So it's a widely fluctuating price profile for LNG. Today, Henry Hub is something in the region of about 6.5, if I'm correct, something in that region. These other numbers are more accurate. This is what we are paying for high sulfur fuel oil. Imported coal would probably cost us about that much in terms of dollars per million BTU. Thar coal would be about the same based on a study that we have undertaken. Oil for transport is substantially more because this is essentially a mix of diesel and motor gasoline, primarily diesel. So these are numbers which are based on current statistics. Okay. Now, if you look at those numbers, and if you look at what we are, if you relate those numbers to what we are consuming in terms of the energy mix for Pakistan, you will see that we are spending a disproportionate amount of money in procuring oil. 56% is being spent on oil. Right. Gas, 12%. I just thought I would put that in because what we are paying for these various sources of fuel is not proportionate to their use. We are paying a lot more for oil than we are for other fuel sources. Okay. Now this is an analysis which I think is of interest. What we have done is we've looked at these numbers, and based on the cost of fuel numbers, we've generated a comparison of the cost of power generation based on each fuel type. Right. So you will note that if we were to confine ourselves to high sulfur fuel oil, we're looking at something like 9 cents per kilowatt hour, which is a very large number. If we're looking at $6 per million BTU LNG, we would be spending something close to 6.8 cents per kilowatt hour for power generation based on LNG. Gas at $4 would give you that. There is not an awful lot of difference between the rest of these. These are in the same sort of ballpark, right? But again, what I have also done is I've broken this up into capital cost, operating cost, and fuel cost. So as you will note, for hydroelectric, for example, there is the capital cost element is huge, as it is in the case of nuclear. Right? When you're looking at thermal power generation, the fuel cost is a significant factor. Now, what we are doing is we in the government are embarking on an exercise which will define for us for the medium term and the long term an optimum energy mix for the country. So we are going through this process of least cost energy alternatives planning. And but this is an exercise which we've just embarked on. The results will not be available tomorrow. But it is nevertheless necessary to undertake that in order for us to make sure that we are on the right track with regard to the development of the energy sector. For the purpose of this presentation, what I have done is I've looked at some scenarios. There is a base case scenario which is based on the assumption that whatever our import requirements are will be met through unconstrained gas import. Not particularly realistic, but I just wanted to make that the reference point. The second one that I've looked at is, if this were not to happen, what would we do? We would make up that difference through LNG and imported coal. So that is a second scenario. The third scenario is based on the assumption that Thar coal will replace imported coal for power generation. We will be able to get our act together finally with regard to the development of Thar and make that resource available for power generation in lieu of imported coal. And the fourth scenario that I've looked at is one which envisages a lower level of utilization of hydroelectric potential than ideal. So what if we are able to do only 70% of what we are setting out to do? What would happen then? And finally, I have a scenario analyzed here which looks at energy conservation applied to the base case. Okay. Now, for these scenarios that I have presented in the earlier slide, what will be the consumption of each fuel? Right. So these are numbers which sort of fall out of those assumptions that I have made. And for the base case, our cost of fuel projections. Today we are spending something like $7 billion. Something in that region, right? In the next 20 years, this number will rise to something like, $37 billion. And the bars that I have here illustrate the composition. How much of that will be due to oil, how much of that will be due to gas, LNG, and coal.
These are today's dollars, right?
Today's dollars. Now, having done that, I have compared the four scenarios that you saw on the earlier slide to the base case scenario. And I've come to the conclusion that the best thing that we can do is to bring Thar into play as quickly as possible. Thar, which is our major core resource, right? Because that results in the least cost for us. The other conclusion, which is fairly obvious from this, is that we need to get our act together with regard to nuclear power development. That is, again, extremely important. As you can see from this, if we are not as successful as we would like to be with regard to hydroelectric power, we would be required to pay a fairly heavy price. So this is, I thought it would be interesting to compare these scenarios. Now, what are the conclusions that we have arrived at? We have substantial coal and hydroelectric resources, but in the short term, it will not be possible to bring these into play. Significant resources, but in the short term, not possible to bring these into play. The dependence on imported energy is expected to increase substantially in the near to medium term. You saw the numbers, 28, I think, to 45, to something like 62, if I remember correctly. Gas pipeline import projects can deliver energy at competitive prices in the near term to meet energy requirements in the residential sector, industrial sector, and power sector. So this is an option that we should actively pursue, gas import pipelines. The development of coal in the medium term can secure the country against high energy prices in the global markets and risks associated with large-scale development of hydroelectric power resources. Development of indigenous coal can be coupled with the inclusion of imported coal for greater diversity in the mix. Now, what is our tendency in the past has been to sort of wait for Thar to happen. That is not a, to my mind, that is not a very sensible way of going about things. We need to, we should not make ourselves hostage to the development of Thar coal. We should move in parallel with imported coal and develop Thar in parallel. So what are we doing? We are importing, we're moving ahead with the implementation of pipeline projects. We are doing an LNG imported project. We are going ahead with the import of power from Central Asia. As I said earlier, we're doing things to incentivize E&P work in Pakistan for oil and gas production. We're looking at coal in principally three ways. We want to use it for mine mouth power generation. We want to also look at coal bed methane. We also want to look at coal gasification. Hydroelectric power generation, as you know, there has been some movement of late, and hopefully we're able to maintain that momentum and considerably enhance our level of hydropower generation. Nuclear power, virtually non-existent. We have something like 450 megawatt today, less than 1% of our mix. And that needs to be made a much more significant player in our energy mix. Renewable energy has, for a long time, been looked upon in Pakistan as a curiosity. A wind farm here and a light-emitting diode there. What we're now trying to do is to mainstream renewable energy, and we're focusing on 4 forms of renewable energy. We're looking at wind, we're looking at biomass, we're looking at small hydro, and we're looking at solar. I think the next slide will probably tell you what we've done in this area. Energy efficiency and management, as I mentioned, we need to do something about optimizing our energy mix. The overwhelming dependence on oil and gas is not the way to go. We need to broaden our base. We need to enforce demand-side management measures in our industrial sector. Extremely low efficiency. That needs to be addressed. Transport sector is a major player. We cannot afford the luxury of having millions and millions of cars floating around the country. Mass transit, that is something that we need to pay much more attention to. Now, I have also identified for you some investment opportunities. The LNG project is moving ahead. We are looking at adding something like 5 million tons per year, 3.5 million tons per year initially through an LNG plant based near Karachi. This is our LNG plan is we're following a sort of a modular approach to LNG capacity addition in Pakistan. That 3.5 will hopefully be succeeded by another 3.5, and we will use LNG to bridge the gap between requirement and availability. Recognizing that LNG is going to cost us more than imported gas through pipelines, we know that, but this is a sort of a strategic decision in a sense, that we do want to make LNG a part of our energy mix. Import, the pipelines are we are at various stages of discussions with the Iranians and the Turkmens. We are moving ahead, and hopefully in the coming weeks, coming months, we will have something more substantive to say. Import of electricity, this is again something that we are working on. This is something that the multilaterals have also been involved in. The World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, they've all been involved in this, but this is again something that will happen in the next few years. It's not an overnight issue here. We're trying to expand our oil refining capacity in Pakistan. We have stagnated at something like 11 million tons per year. We need to expand that capacity. We have put out a document seeking expressions of interest for a large refinery that will meet both domestic requirements and will also be able to export surplus petroleum products. This is, and we're looking at 2 locations, Gwadar and Khalifa Point in Pakistan. Hydroelectric power is again something that we're trying to involve our private sector in. The private sector so far has been involved principally in thermal power generation, but we've now put on offer hydroelectric projects for the private sector. Charcoal, I've already talked about. We are trying to get the private sector involved. There are various initiatives that have been taken, but we haven't reached a decisive stage yet. Power generation from imported coal, again something that we are planning to do. Power generation from renewable energy. We have drafted a renewable energy policy. Hopefully this will be approved by the government soon. And this will set the course for mainstreaming renewable energy. This is very, very important. What we have done as an immediate step is developed a package of incentives which will precipitate some renewable energy projects. So these will be precipitated, hopefully provide an incentive for investors to invest in renewable energy. So that is the approach that we're following. With regard to the various entities, public sector entities in the oil and gas sector, there are a number of entities that are at various stages of privatization, and so there are investment opportunities in that area. And that's about it. Thank you very much indeed.
Mr. Ahmed is consented to take some questions. With apologies to this next panel, I'm going to take just a little bit of their time, and I apologize in advance. I spoke too long to get us started. A couple of requests. This is being webcast. It's streaming out on our website right now. What that means for you is that you need to wait until Mark passes you the microphone. So after I recognize you, please identify yourself. Please wait for the microphone, And lastly, please keep your questions, comments, observations as brief as possible. I saw Javed first, and then I saw Walter second. Javed Burki.
Well, my name is Javed Burki. I have interest in Pakistan. I continue to worry about the country's prospects, so hence my question is related, Mr. Ahmed, to one particular observation you made at the very end of your presentation. It says, while Pakistan has substantial coal and hydro resources, it is not possible to develop and utilize these resources in the short term in view of inherent constraints. Could you please just enlighten us exactly what you mean by inherent constraints?
Well, let me, to talk of coal, for example. I don't need that, right? You can hear me?
No, you're fine.
Okay. Okay. Now, with regard to coal, to bring Thar into play, for example, there are severe technical constraints that need to be addressed. There is the area in which Thar is located has a severe water shortage problem. And the amount of water that is required for an integrated coal mining and power generation operation, that amount of water is not readily available. So that technical constraint needs to be overcome. Okay. We need to put in place the infrastructure for the development of coal. So it is, I think the point that we need to address is, what do I mean by short term and what do I mean by medium term? I do not expect Thar to be a significant player over the next 5 years. I do not expect that to happen. Right? If we look beyond 5 years, if we are able to get our act together, it should. With regard to hydroelectric power, as you know, we've been battling a variety of factors: political, technical. I think a start has been made, as I mentioned in my remarks, with regard to the development of one large hydroelectric project, the Basha Dam. As you would know, there was a decision by the government fairly recently, a matter of a few weeks ago, in which it was stated that I don't remember whether it was 6 or 5, but 5 or 6 major hydroelectric projects would be undertaken, including Kalabagh, including Basha, and 3 or 4 others. So, but again, these projects have a long gestation period. Right? I mean, you cannot do a large hydroelectric project in the matter of 5 years. So these are, the nature of the animal is such that you will not be able to commission these projects over the short term. That's what I meant.
Walter?
Yeah. Walter Anderson from School of Advanced International Studies. India and China have adopted a strategy of establishing quasi-independent companies to explore, develop, buy around the world. Has Pakistan gone into this used this tactic as well, and is this feasible for Pakistan to do?
I don't think it is. I think that India and China operate on a scale which is much larger than Pakistan's. I do not think that we are operating at that level yet. Our public sector company, which is the Oil and Gas Development Company, has a lot of work to do at home and before it can venture into the outside world. I don't think we're at that stage yet.
Bish Podell, and then Bish, and when you finish with the microphone, if you'll hand it to the lady right behind you.
Yeah, my name is Bishnu Podell, Chairman of National Advisory Council, South Asian Affairs. My simple question is, there is a philosophic concept in Pakistan for Islamization of economy. How does your consideration and planning for energy development and right use of energy work with Islamization of economy?
That's certainly not my area, but we are approaching the development of the energy sector in a fairly straightforward commercial manner. We are not hamstrung by Islamization related constraints. We are tackling this in a fairly straightforward manner in accordance with international norms. So I don't see that as being an impediment.
Hi, my name is Mishka Zaman. I work here in Washington. Two questions. One is, given the scenario and our need for energy in Pakistan, what are some of the considerations that the government is giving to enhance the environmental management side of things, given that our environmental agencies are not very well staffed or resourced, while, as we go forward with these? And secondly, a considerable amount of revenue will be generated through the different kinds of projects that you talked about. What thoughts are being given to transparency in revenue sharing? Private companies will come in, the government will also be involved, and also fairer arrangements in terms of sharing those revenues with the areas where the resources are placed and where the generation is taking place, so that we don't get into the similar problems that we're seeing now in Balochistan.
Okay. Let me try and answer these. I would agree with you that we need to do a lot more with regard to our with regard to environmental protection. As we move down the road, I have advocated in my presentation that we place a lot more, much more emphasis on the development of coal, for example. This matter of environmental protection assumes even greater importance. What we are going to do with regard to the development of coal for power generation, for example, is to look at clean coal alternatives. Right? I mean, this is, in terms of capital cost, it's a more expensive proposition. You probably be paying something like 20-30% more for an environmentally benign power generation plant based on coal relative to the conventional one. But we are actively thinking of doing this. On the issue of transparency, I mentioned in my presentation that what we are aiming for is a rational industry structure. In other words, what we're trying to do is to confine the government's role to policy formulation. We're trying to have put in place a mechanism for arm's length regulation of the sector, right, and leave the running of the companies to independent boards of directors. Right. Now, that in itself, if we are able to put that structure in place, I think that will provide for greater transparency. The boards of directors, for example, would be required, hopefully, to implement transparency mechanisms in the way they operate. Right? In the past, with everybody doing everything, the picture has been somewhat confused. And we're trying to clarify this. So if we have a clear definition of responsibilities, I'm hopeful that we will be able to introduce greater transparency in the way we operate.
I don't want to take too much of the next panel, so I'm going to recognize two more questioners. At least 5 of my good friends have caught my eye. So I'm going to get myself in a lot of trouble, but I'm simply going to recognize the 2 people whose hands I saw first. There was a hand in the very back that I saw, and John, I saw your hand. And for the rest of you who have caught my eye, there'll be more opportunities during the course of the day, and I apologize.
Yes, my name is Zinat Ziad. I was wondering if you could kindly elaborate on what you're doing or planning to do about renewable energy.
to start with, what we have done is we have drafted a policy for renewable energy. And this policy that we're hoping to push through the government system in the next few days, weeks, is one which defines objectives for the short term, the medium term, and the long term. What a policy framework. Our emphasis is on three principal forms of renewable energy: wind, biomass, and small hydro, and also solar. Solar, I'm not putting in the same league as the other three, because solar is not as commercially competitive even today relative to these other three. With regard to wind, we have an active program. There is a wind corridor in Sindh that we are trying to develop. We have a Marshal Shahid Ahmed here, who is the chairman of the Alternative Energy Development Board, who can give you more information if that should be necessary. But we're trying to install wind farms in that corridor. With regard to biomass, we have an approach whereby we are trying to do two things. In rural areas which have access to agricultural waste, like bagasse, like rice husk, we are trying to promote the use of that biomass for power generation. In urban centers, we are hopeful. We are hopefully moving towards the utilization of municipal waste for power generation. Right? So that is a sort of a two-pronged approach to that. Small hydros, we're looking at principally the Northwest Frontier Province and Punjab, where run-of-the-river projects are being promoted for small hydro power generation. Solar power is again something that we're looking at in the context of rural electrification. So that is the approach. We are trying to, as I said earlier, mainstream renewable energy rather than look upon this as a curiosity, which has been the tendency in the past.
Yes, my name is John Sandrock. I have a question about the pipeline that you envision from Turkmenistan through Afghanistan. First of all, the political considerations, geopolitical considerations. Turkmen gas, there's a good deal of competition for that. They're looking to pipe that out to Europe. Gazprom, the Russians, of course, are very much involved in this process. I just wonder if you could give us an assessment as to how viable you really think this project is going to be. It's been talked about and planned for many years, but obviously the competitive pressures there are going to be quite great, and I wonder what Pakistan's priority on that will be.
You're absolutely right. As I may have mentioned in my opening remarks, none of these gas import projects are straightforward. There are complexities associated with each one of them, each and every one of them. Now, as far as Turkmenistan is concerned, one of the questions that we've been battling with for some time is the gas availability question. And this has two dimensions to it. How much gas is there in the ground? That's question number one. And question number two, how much of that can be committed to the project? Right. With regard to the first question, I have looked at numbers which indicate that there is enough gas in the ground to support a 30-year project for Pakistan and India. That is, the numbers seem to be credible, right? This certification was done by a U.S. outfit called DeGolyer and McNaughton. You may be familiar with them. So that is a question which I think has been answered. The second one is a more tricky one. Turkmenistan has a number of contracts with a number of countries. And we have been assured in writing by the Turkmens that the required amount of gas will be made available notwithstanding these other commitments. Now, what the credibility of that assurance is something that we can talk about indefinitely. Right? I mean, but that is the way things are. We have other issues to deal with. We have the transit issue to deal with. So it is hugely complex. I mean, we recognize that, but we believe that there are risk mitigation measures that we can put in place to address these issues. Right? So it is alive, and hopefully someday it will happen.
Join me, if you will, in a round of applause for our gotten us off to a great start. Copies of his written presentation are out on the table. Help yourself for those of you who didn't get it. I want to go straight to our next panel, but before I do, when I introduced some of the key people involved in this conference before, two people were not here, and I want them to stand up now. Aisha, don't leave the room, please. Raise your hand. This is Aisha Yuki, who is with us for the summer, and we're delighted to have her. And Bamika, you were not here before. Would you please raise your hand? Bamika Machala played a key role in helping us to organize this, and I want to thank them as well as the other members of my staff. We're now going to move directly into our next panel, which is chaired by Ziad Al-Haddad. Ziad has been for many years one of the World Bank's leading experts on energy issues. Ziad, I apologize for eating into your time, but I know that we've got four really top-notch presentations here, and without further ado, I turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Bob, and thank you for this opportunity to chair this first session. Mukhtar, you've got us off to a tremendous start with the overview that you've given, and I really look forward to the four panelists who will speak in this first session. I want to restrict my comments at this stage because I'd like to move very quickly to the business at hand. But I would like to introduce our speakers. You have their bios, and please look up those bios in case you want to know more about the speakers. And I will just introduce them at the beginning so that I don't have to, in fact, stand up again while they are speaking. I first like to just comment a little bit on the structure of the first session, which I think is rather well put together, Bob. My compliments to you and your team for doing that, because it fits in very nicely with the overview that Mukhtar, you have presented, because Shahid, Javed, Burki, who will be the first speaker, will be picking up on the more broad general aspects, looking at the weight of history and seeing where we stand, and hope to provide some of the rejoinders and some of the comments on what you have told us, Mukhtar. This promises to be an interesting discussion. And Shahid needs no introduction. He was the former finance minister of Pakistan. We're privileged to have him here. After that, it will be Robert Looney of the Naval Postgraduate School, who will take us through the alternative energy development scenarios up to the year 2035. I'm so glad that we're looking at a long-term picture. And Mukhtar, again, thank you for setting the pace on that too. This will be followed by Bikash Pandey of Winrock International, who will address the aspect of clean energy options in the context of the rural sector. Extremely important. 50% of Pakistan's energy is off-grid. And what are we doing about the rural sector? And I'm particularly privileged to in fact, introduce Dorothy Lele of CEDA. I'm so glad that this dimension, the social dimension, has been introduced. So it's a nice rounding up of the first session to bring back the whole picture again, with particular reference to the gender issue, which I strongly feel in Pakistan is critical in the energy sector. So once again, that was a really good thought. Few quick comments on the timing. Since Bob, you have eaten up into the time a little bit, what I have to do is have strict timekeeping, as you have instructed me, Bob. We have about 17 minutes per speaker, so I would be calling upon the speakers to please restrict themselves to that time. I will have these shocking pink slips, which I don't want to pass around, but in case I have to, please forgive me for that in advance. So without much ado, let me pass it on. What I would like to just say one more word is that the way I'd like to structure this, if it's okay with you, after the speakers, I will try to do a very brief summing up and in fact leave some time for some comments and questions from the audience on their reactions to the four speakers. So without much ado, can I then pass it on to Shahid Javed Burki.
That's taken 1.5 minutes. which leaves me with 15 and a half. I think Mukhtar Ahmed gave such a very good presentation. He, as Ziad said, he's gotten us off to a very good start. In fact, such a good start that I have decided to completely abandon the outline that I had prepared, which Bob Hathaway had seen and had encouraged me to use as the focus of my speech. I do this for a couple of reasons. One, I was struck by one thing. As Mukhtar Ahmed was delivering his speech, he was focused on how to increase the supply of energy in the country, given its given the increase in estimated demand. Underlying assumption made by him, and for this he relied very heavily on a document that was put out by the Planning Commission a few months ago, which suggests that Pakistan is going to run into a very severe energy constraint unless it builds up energy supply. So that was essentially the basis of the presentation that he made. Secondly, I was struck by the fact that in making his presentation, he did not use any investment numbers. He didn't tell us as to how much investment will be required in order to meet with the various scenarios that he placed before us. Now, whether that was a deliberate omission or omission because a sectoral person essentially concerns himself with sectoral issues and not macro issues, I don't know. But in Mr. Mukhtar Ahmed, when you were out, I was saying that you have made such a wonderful presentation that I've had to completely give up on the outline that I had prepared and then make a very different kind of presentation from the one that I was originally planning to make. And in that context, I was saying that I was struck by two things. One, that you were focusing essentially on the projected supply-demand gap. And I've seen those numbers and have used those numbers, which seem to suggest that for the next 20 years or so, demand going to outstrip availability of possible supply by a factor of about 50-60%. And so obviously a crisis is looming, and how does one address that problem? And in that light, you presented what I thought was a very interesting program that the government has committed itself to. But as an economist, I would like to ask a different question, or a series of different questions. One, is the money that is going to be needed, is the investment that will be required for doing this going to become available? Now, this for Pakistan is a particularly important issue since we are now being told that as a result of the policies initiated by this government over the last 4 or 5 years, the country has been placed on a sustainable path of reasonably rapid growth. Mukhtar Ahmed himself mentioned a figure of 8.4% GDP growth in this year, which is going to end in a couple of days, and that the estimated rate of growth for the year that ended last year, and for this year the projected growth rate is about 6.5%, still very high. I have maintained, I don't want to go into this at any length, that these are not sustainable rates. They are not sustainable rates because the economy does not have the resources available to it to make the type of investment that needs to be made in order to generate these kinds of resources. When I read the document that Mr. Mukhtar Ahmed used for the basic data on energy, it troubles me because the assumption over there is that with a relatively low level of investment, Pakistan will be able to generate a very high level of growth rate. I don't think that would happen. And therefore, I would be very interested in finding out that given this resource constraint, do we have the resources available both within the public sector and the private sector to generate the kinds of supplies that we have been told will be needed in order to produce the kind of energy that's going to be needed in the amount and the quality and in structure in order to feed a rapidly growing economy. Having said that, and listening to his presentation, I said to myself that once again we are putting out what I would call a passive approach on the part of energy planners to the development of the energy sector. I call this passive because it is always reacting to the demand that is generated by a rapidly growing economy and a rapidly restructuring economy. When that happens, the demand for energy goes up, and then the government begins to get nervous, puts together all kinds of programs in order to meet with the shortfalls that have been created. This has resulted in what I call a roller coaster path that Pakistan has taken for its entire economy as well as for the various sectors into which the economy is divided. If you look at the history of consumption and history of energy production in Pakistan, you will see that every time there was a rapid growth of economy, it happened during the 1960s when the first military government was in place and the GDP increased at the rate of about 6.4%. And after that period of about 10, 11 years, there was a severe energy shortage. And the government then had to meet that energy shortage, and that resulted in massive amounts of investment that were made following that period. The second period of high rate of growth, again during military's rule, was in the 1980s when economy grew at the rate of about 6.5%, energy demand increased by a significant amount, and the government then came up with a different approach. This was to get the private sector to come in and close the gap by making investments as a result of very generous incentives that were given. So essentially, the way Pakistan has gone is try and meet the enormous amount of demand that is put on the energy sector as a result of a very sharp increase in GDP growth and changes in the structure of the economy. And then you take policies that are reasonable at that time or seem reasonable at that time given the resource constraint and so on and so forth, and then that particular crisis is solved for a short period of time, and then once again we are back into the cycle of rapid economic growth, a great increase in the demand of energy, and that situation has now once again reappeared as economic growth has picked up. Now, is there a way of getting out of this vicious cycle that we have been through several times? And my view is that perhaps there is, but that would need a very, very new way of thinking and looking at the energy sector. What intrigued me about his presentation and what I liked about that presentation was the focus on the following: that this economy is currently faced with a very serious supply-demand gap, and yet this country has some very, very large sources of energy available to it which could be exploited. The question that I ask myself is whether we have the energy, not electricity, but human energy, and political will and the wisdom to think outside the box and say to ourselves that given what is happening to the global energy situation, could Pakistan forget about focusing its entire attention on developing energy in order to meet its own requirement, but begin to use energy as a driver of the economy? Could Pakistan begin to think of energy as a leading sector of the economy? And my view is, coming to this as a person who has worried about sources of growth all over the world, that there are 3 sectors in Pakistan. In each one of them, we have enormous amount of potential. And in each one of them, we have managed not to take the kind of interest that needs to be taken in order to build the country on these sectors. The sectors are agriculture, human resource, and energy. Now, if what we were told about the potential of hydropower, we were told that we can, in Pakistan, generate something like 48,000 megawatts of energy from hydropower. We were also told that we are the 8th largest country in terms of deposits of coal. We also know, and this comes from a report that Ziad Al-Haddad gave me yesterday, done by the World Bank on Pakistan's oil and gas sector, that Pakistan has been negligent and somewhat lazy in terms of investing in the gas sector, that there is much more gas available in the country if the country was to set its policies right. So in other words, what I'm saying is, as is the case with agriculture sector, one of the finest in the world, as is the case with human resource sector, one of the larger population in the world and one of the youngest populations in the world. Energy sector also seems to be, to me at least, a sector that could be developed independently of its link with the larger economy and become a contributor to economic growth rather than reacting passively to the demands of economic growth. And that's why I was asking Mr. Mukhtar Ahmed the question that what does he mean by these inherent constraints? It is in the business of economics to look at potential and then address yourself to seeing how that potential can be realized. Why should there be a waiting period of 5 to 10 years to develop the Thar coal when technologies have been worked upon by the United States? China is bringing them. There is now a lot of ferment in this particular society, in the American society, of engineers and so on, working on coal, that they have that they have discovered new technologies which would make it easier for them to use coal. I'm told when I talk to the experts and read what they're writing, that something like 1,000 coal plants are now in the process of being prepared for investment. So there is enough happening in the coal area that we should get aggressively engaged in this sector and try and generate power from this sector and try and generate enough power not only to meet with our own demands, but to see what we can do with possible export of energy generated by coal and by hydropower. So essentially, my take is to make the planners in Pakistan think, not passively in always responding to a problem that is generated once the economy has grown so rapidly that demand-supply gaps appear, but to treat energy, if what he had told us about the resources available, as an independent sector which could become the driver of the economy in the years to come. This is where another subject that I would have liked him to address needs to be looked at. What is the global energy situation in which we are operating? And what is the regional energy situation in which we are operating? I know the Indian situation reasonably well, and I know that India is going to face with an enormous energy constraint for it to produce the kinds of rates of growth that the Indian people are talking about, 7 to 9% a year. And at this point, they don't have domestic resources of energy to meet that kind of demand. Could Pakistan play a role in this? Could Pakistan have an arrangement with the Indians that we begin to provide, with the help of the Indians, or obtain from India the capital that it has available for investing abroad? After all, the Indians are investing in Nigeria, in Kazakhstan, and so on and so forth. Shouldn't they be invited to come and invest in Pakistan, in the hydro projects and in coal, in which they have a lot of expertise and so on? So if you change the direction of approach, if you begin to think regionally, globally, if you begin to think in terms of developing a sector which would then become the sector that pushes the rest of the economy rather than being pulled by the rest of the economy, then you're addressing a very different sets of questions. Then you're going to ask questions about technology, you're going to ask questions about resource flows, you're going to ask questions about how transnational corporations would like to enter the country and how do we facilitate their coming in. We like to talk about development of regional grids so that power generated can be exported, imported, and so on. So it's a very different planning ball game if this approach is to be adopted. I've got 30 seconds. I'll take 30 seconds to raise an extremely important issue, and these can always be raised in a small amount of time because they are difficult to answer. Somebody raised a question about how do we enter into some kind of an arrangement with the Balochis and with people from the frontier province in order to compensate them for the development of resources. Another thing that intrigues me about Pakistan, and I looked at his map, and it hits you straight, is the following: that the country has a very serious, what I will call, east-west divide. Most of the sources of energy are west of the Indus River. Most of the supplies, most of the demand centers are on the east of the Indus River. We have to look at this situation in the following sense. We are generating rents from the use of these resources. These rents are currently captured by the central government. Shouldn't the areas from which these rents are being generated be once again made available to the people of those areas? If a comprehensive framework within the concept of something like National Finance Commission Award could be developed based on this kind of view, that as we begin to use energy not only for firing the domestic industry but also for becoming perhaps a major exporter within the region of this type of industry, how can we give the benefits of that kind of strategy to the people whose resources we will be raising? It's a major issue, but it needs to be raised in order to be accommodated within a strategy of energy development. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Shahid, thank you very much for that. And now let me invite Robert Looney of the Naval Postgraduate School. Robert.
Michael, is the presentation loaded and ready to go? Yeah.
How do I find it? I'm going to feel undressed without my slides. I think one of the nightmares most speakers have is to come to one of these things and be amongst very knowledgeable people who've already said most of the things I planned to say. So another nightmare come true, I'm afraid. I agree, I'm a very agreeable person. I agree with both speakers so far, even though they seem to a certain extent, be a little bit at odds. I'm an economist, so I'll approach it very much from the perspective Dr. Burki would look at it. I've tried to integrate, to a certain extent, a model that looks at, let's see.
You're not in the mood for these.
It looks at energy in the economy, tries to integrate the two. Try to develop, again, based on some historical patterns, some empirical studies that have been put in the academic literature over the years, develop a macroeconomic energy forecasting model, develop some scenarios, look at just some different outcomes that might take place as a result of different energy availabilities, use those to develop some supply and demand balances up until 2035, and then draw a few policy implications from that. Of course, the main pattern that's been around is the increasing gap between energy production and energy use in Pakistan. This is some World Bank data, and I think we have more recent years we'd see the gap increasing somewhat. In terms of the model, one of the things that bothers me, I think like Dr. Burki, is that past efforts have assumed these kind of constant rates of growth. One of the 25-year energy forecasting model, energy plan, assumes a 7.4, 7.5% rate of growth between here and 2035. That would result in about $37 to $40 billion worth of expenditure on the energy sector. And I'm not too sure that that's the correct way to look at it. I mean, I don't want to contradict plans that are out there, but I think it's a value to look at some alternative scenarios and see just how they might change the situation a bit, and perhaps introduce more of a discussion about the relevant constraints, financial constraints on energy development. So my model, the main departures are essentially to look at the economy in terms of a cyclical pattern of growth rather than just a sustained pattern. How do energy availabilities affect growth? I was particularly interested again in Dr. Burki's point that maybe we should look at energy sector as a leading sector and an input into growth rather than a passive responder to growth. What are some of the interrelationships between the different energy sectors? Do they compete with each other in terms of demand? Do they compete with each other in terms of supply? How does that affect things? The final point here is a tricky one. It's just how do future oil prices affect all of this? Obviously, they're going to have a tremendous impact on both the supplies and demands of energy. And if we have rising world oil prices in the future, is this going to generate one set of scenarios that's quite different than if we have, say, gradually falling oil prices. The model, again, is based on the cyclical pattern, looks at a lot of stable relationships. It's kind of surprised from a statistical point of view, the amount of stable relationships between energy and the economy, and tries to take into account several adverse effects in energy that are developing right now. The shift from hydro to oil and gas, in terms of generation of electricity, shift from industry to households, and the very low rate of capital formation in energy. I was a little bit surprised looking at the last Pakistan Economic Survey, just what appears to be falling investment rates in oil and gas. If you looked at those from 1999 to 2000, up until 95, 96, you would see actual decline in investment in those sectors. The studies looking at energy and the economy, the empirical studies, do indicate that there is some direct links between energy growth and the economy itself. These vary a little bit by type of energy, though. Some other studies indicate that investment leads to energy development, investment in infrastructure, and in turn, energy development has a stimulating effect on investment. So it's a backward-forward relationship where there are interdependencies between the two. These seem to be strengthening over time, and this leads to another point that Dr. Burki pointed out. There may be an environment where both virtuous circles and adverse cycles can develop, where growth feeds on growth and generates more growth, or again, a slowdown in the economy can result in slowdown in energy development and another slowdown in terms of energy development. The model itself, I don't know if this explains it too well. It starts off with energy availability over here, different amounts of energy availability. I assume certain rates of gross capital formation. That generates GDP per capita, and it generates some other figures that are used in the actual model itself. Then I have world oil prices over here. World oil prices times the rupee exchange rate to kind of convert into a Pakistani general oil price. Those then generate the supply of energy production, domestic energy production, and they also generate energy demands. These then come to the final stage over here and generate balances over time between supply and demand for energy. I developed 7 different scenarios, just kind of curious to see what the sensitivity of the model was to different assumptions about energy, how that affected the economic growth rates, and then again, were there any major differences in the supply and demand gaps when we get out to, say, 2020, 2030, and so on. First model is just a basic baseline forecast where everything increases at 3% per year. The second one tries to stimulate the cyclical model, where investment fluctuates between 2 and 4% every 10 years. We get different rates of growth of energy availability. Could be both imports and domestic production. 7-10% fluctuation for gas, coal 4 and 11%, hydro 4 and 6%. Model 3 looks at it's basically holding hydro at a low level of development to see what the consequences would be of that. The next model looks at a high investment strategy. And again, I think Dr. Burki's point is good. Pakistan has invested at low rates in the past, and it's a question of what would be the maximum sustained rate of growth of investment that could take place. I put it at 6% per annum, up to 35. Gas at 7%, coal at 5, and hydro, this fluctuating pattern is in Model 2. Model 5 looks more at maybe private sector-led growth. We would get an expansion of gas at 7%, coal at 5. Model 6 looks at expanded dam construction. What have we just emphasized up at front? Development of hydro, major expansion of dams. Hydro would be expanding then gradually, 5, 7, 9, 11% over time. Final one looks at more of an emphasis maybe on gas and coal to see just what its growth implications would be. To summarize a little bit the GDP per capita growth rates that are associated with each one of these strategies. There are a few patterns here. I would say the baseline is pretty unacceptable. This is per capita income. Pretty low figures for that. The historical cyclical pattern where you have 10 years of growth, maybe 10 years that are kind of flat, again, accelerates a bit if you look at it in that perspective. Lagging hydro, again, reduces down the rate of growth from forecast 2 down to somewhat lower figures over time. High investment, again, stabilizes the growth pattern, so there might be some advantages to that over time. Growth doesn't get up as high as some of the other scenarios, but doesn't dip down as low either. The low coal scenario is, again, one you could compare with 4, and there's a falling growth as a result. Well, the high investment, high hydro strategy gives you an expanding rate of growth over time, getting up to 7.37% by the end period. Moderate emphasis on coal and gas, again, a little bit lower rate of growth than you would get with the hydro development. So gives us a little bit of an idea of the contributions that the different mixes of energy could provide in terms of generating economic growth. Which of these is best? I think depends, again, on maybe another number of macroeconomic considerations, which are consistent maybe with balance of payments deficits, which are consistent with a certain amount of inflation, things of that sort. I haven't been able to integrate all of those into a broader macroeconomic model yet. What I did do was come up with again, the supply and demand balances that each one of these implies over time. The first one looks at the energy consumption, and there's similar relationships between the different types of energy. Kind of a competitive one between gas and oil, petroleum. Not too many competitive relationships with electricity. Expanded oil, petroleum has sharply reduced coal consumption, though.